All right, once again, thank you all for joining us, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Wanted to welcome everybody to the next iteration of our Ask a Fluxxpert Q&A webinar around workflows. So it's going to be about a 30-minute session, and it's simply an opportunity for you to get your questions answered on various topics by experts on our team. So before we get started into the Q&A, I just want to make sure that everybody is familiar with how you can submit your questions as they come up. So if you don't mind, I'd like you to find the chat button in your webinar browser. And once you find it, make sure that you set the field to presenters and attendees, and then say hello in your favorite language. So let's see how we can say hello out there. Aloha. All right, I want to make sure that everybody has the ability to utilize the tools. So today's Q&A session, we're going to invite you to submit any and all your questions that you have about workflows at any time into the chat field, or you can enter through the Q&A section of the web browser. Just make sure that you either set it for presenters and attendees if you'd like everybody to see, or if you just want it to go to the presenters, make sure you set that if you want to submit it anonymously. And hello to you, Kenneth. All right, so next I want to introduce you to our Fluxxperts here today. We have Carly Benkov and Amor Chan. If you don't mind, can you say hello to our participants and share what you do here at Flux? So if we don't, Carly, let's start with you.
Thanks, Sean. Hey, everyone. My name is Carly Benkov. I'm a senior technical project manager. My main responsibilities are around helping our new clients get ready to go live with their site. So focusing on business analysis and configuration and data migrations. I've been working with Flux for about 3.5 years. I'm based in New York City, and I'm very happy that it's summer here.
I bet. All right. Thank you very much, Carly. And now, Amar, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself.
No problem, Sean. Thank you. Hey, everyone. This is Amar Chauhan here. I've been at Flux for about 6 months. I'm a senior implementation specialist working on some small to about mid-scale projects here, and really excited to be joining the webinar.
All right, excellent. And we are out here in lovely San Francisco, where the Bay Area has been experiencing some great weather of late. Rather hot, but probably not as hot as New York standards for you, Carly. So, all right, so let's jump into kind of the background why we're doing the Ask a Fluxxpert training or Q&A webinars. We've had a lot of hands-on content at the Ignite conference this year, and we wanted to design a program that would make sure that we keep the ball rolling. So hopefully you've been keeping up with all the content from each breakout session from Ignite that we've posted in the community site. And so this Q&A session is designed to be a follow-up to those posts and give you an opportunity to ask any questions you have on the topics listed. So we're going to be covering 2 of the Ignite sessions today, all focused on workflows within the Flux platform, the workflow basics and workflow and roles. So let's get started. So first, we're going to take a little bit of time to answer some questions from various Flux customers. And remember, you can submit more questions in the chat field or the Q&A section at any time. So if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in there. If we answer them as we go, then we can just keep moving. Otherwise, we'll have a chance to try to stump a Fluxxpert here. So first off, one of the pre-submitted questions is, what's a state type, and how does that affect a workflow? So Amar, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure thing. So for those folks here on the line, I'm sure you've used Flux for quite a while, and maybe for some of you who are relatively new to that, we'll just get a little bit of introduction on what a state is. So as you're working with your particular application through your workflow, a state is nothing more than a point within that workflow. So an example being, you might have a particular state called, let's say, an initial application review, where some type of action occurs. So really, that state is going to allow you within your application process to go to that point and be able to take a specific action. So at its simplest definition, a state is a point within your workflow where you can take a particular action on your application.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. So for our next submitted question we have for our sponsorships, our president wants feedback from every single program officer. Can this be simultaneous review, or does this have to be linear? Carly, can you share your thoughts around that one?
Yeah, hi everyone, this is Carly. I think that there's more than one answer to this question. So the specific question, can this be simultaneous review or does it have to be linear? It's not an or, it could be both. So if I was, in person with this client and they asked me this, I guess I would ask some follow-up questions. Does every single program officer need to review every single grant every single time? If so, I probably would make it linear. That way you're really ensuring that each user is touching the request record, leaving their comment. The president will see that line that everybody has touched it. Also, I guess it depends on how many program officers you have, right? The other way to approach it, though, is if it's not every single program officer every single time, some people might kind of have that they want whichever program officer can get to it, needs to review it, but one must review it, for example. And so for that reason, it can be simultaneous, and you can have more than one program officer editing and updating and saving a record at the same time. The caveat there is, for anybody that's been using the system, knows you will lock somebody else out. So not more than one person can be editing it at the same exact time, but they can be editing it within the same workflow state. So if I logged in as Program Officer A and clicked edit, left some notes, and Program Officer B tried to edit it while I was editing it, they would be locked out with a note that said Program Officer A is editing this record right now. Once Program Officer A saved it, though, Program Officer B could go in and add their comments as well. And then whoever wanted to move it forward could move it forward. So I do think that there's a lot of flexibility here, and there's some follow-up questions to the president about what their exact requirements are.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, Carly. I mean, the customization that you can do with Flux to meet your individual needs, it seems like there's endless opportunities. And, here in support and internally, that's what makes it so unique and interesting, is that there's no cookie cutter approach for every client. Everybody has a specific need, and we're able to help kind of build that out to match their needs. So great. Thank you very much, Carly. So next we have, is there any way to delegate to someone during a vacation? Can a user be temporarily added if someone is away? What do you think?
Sure thing, Sean. So this is Amar here. So one of the things I'd first ask here again is maybe another follow-up question. We'd want to really know who this person is, who this particular user and their particular skills would be. Are they going to be an administrator who's briefly taking over? Are they going to be part of the internal staff or part of the program staff as well? Maybe once we gather those answers, we can then move forward from there. But simply, you can, the admin can always add a user if they wish into the system, provide that user their particular set of rights that are needed, and have that user act as a proxy, maybe while the admin's away or while the other type of user is away. Once that user has come back, the temporary user could be removed, or they could be left into the system if needed, or redelegated to a different profile or set of roles as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Thank you very much. Let's get into the last of the pre-submitted questions, but before we do so, I just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity for any of those questions you have. Go ahead and enter them into the Q&A section or the chat, and we'll be able to help you out. So lastly, we have here is, can workflow groups be added to payment card? Carly, can you help us out with that one?
Definitely. I have to admit that I needed to read this question twice, actually. I first read it, can workflow be added to a payment card? And the answer is yes. And workflow can be added to almost every model, not all models, but many models can have workflow, including organization, payment, reports. But this question specifically asking about workflow groups, and the reason why I had to read it twice was because workflow groups is relatively new functionality that I often forget about. And so workflow groups are really awesome. It's a way to allow for your users to filter based on a group of workflows instead of just one individual workflow. And you can configure that in the admin panel through the workflow area. So once you go to workflow, then there's a new tab called workflow groups. And you're basically saying, I want workflow called draft and review and president review to all be in a workflow group that maybe you would label something like under review. And that way the user, when they're creating a filtered card, can just pick that one workflow group instead of having to pick all 3 of the workflow states that are included in that group. So it's a great tool. It's really meant for kind of your simple filter end users who are going to search for data on a regular basis and want easier access to have to find what they're looking for instead of having to remember all of the different workflow states that you might have. So the answer to the question is yes, you can use workflow groups in payment cards, and you can use workflow groups in any of the models that have workflow.
That's pretty exciting. We're helping everybody work smarter and not harder by kind of streamlining everything and all the legwork they need to do to display the appropriate records. So very cool stuff. All right, so now let's get into the Q&A section. So we're going to open it up and find out what questions you have about workflows within Flux that we can help you out with. So we'll be taking a look through the Q&A and the chat for all your submitted questions. So let's start here. I have one. Let's see here. It says, do you have to create a theme and then a workflow? Amar, can you help us out with that one?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, so the answer to that would be yes. So in order to have a workflow, you'll definitely need to essentially create a theme around your application, because if you don't have an active application out there, you won't be able to create a workflow or have a workflow set up in order to guide the application from point A to point B.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You start with a theme, right? And then you give it the workflow, right? You can't fill up a gas tank if you don't have a car, right? You got to give it the gas. You need somewhere to take it. All right, so great. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see. We have one here around guard instructions, which is a good question. Are guard instructions case sensitive? Carly, what are your thoughts around that one?
Yeah, not a thought, just an answer, I'd say. That yes, they are case sensitive. And this is more of an advanced configuration for your workflows. I hosted a session on this during Ignite, where we did some practice exercises around how to write guard instructions. So guard instructions allow you to show or hide workflow buttons based on really any sort of data point that's in the system. But because it's advanced, it's not necessarily configurable, meaning it's not a drag and drop, click and save kind of way to set them up. You actually have to write them out by hand. And not only are they case sensitive, it's very easy to have a typo mistake as well. So it's very important to have the exact name of your system field when you're writing guard instructions, and follow the case sensitivity that is there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it can quickly go wrong just with a simple missed keystroke. But what's a best practice of where we should try new settings, do you guys think? Right, if we're going to try to implement something new like guard instructions, yeah. I would recommend that we have you test in your pre-production site, because you don't want something to stop work all of a sudden because you missed a space or put a capital L instead of a lowercase or whatever it may be. So
yeah, I would always recommend trying out new configuration in pre-prod, of course. And additionally, sometimes we forget, what the system names are of our fields, and that is the field that you need to be utilizing for guard instructions. So if you need a refresher on your system names, I'd recommend generating the Flux glossary from your live reports. That's a live report that comes with everybody's instance, and you can select which model you want to generate that from. And on the output, you'll get all of the fields that exist on that model, what form they're on, what the label is of that field on the form, and the system name, right? Because we might have a system name that's called activities, but on the label, the programmatic staff has changed what kind of question they want to ask many times over, and we've forgotten that the original field system name was activities. But the system name of activities is what the guard instruction will need to point at.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That live report for the Flux glossary, that's extremely helpful when you're building out stuff. And one of a few releases back, we also added a little checkbox when you're in a form builder. On the very top bar, there's a BEN, which is backend name, and that's helpful as well because it'll put the backend name on that field on the form builder for quick reference. So if it's labeled something other than what the backend, you have a quick reference there as well. So great point.
Thanks for that reminder, Sean. I always forget about that recent enhancement as well. There are just too many enhancements of late. I think that's a great tool when using the form builder, the backend.
Yeah, the live report is a great reference point as well. But yeah, I don't know that there's never too many enhancements, right? There's always room for something more we can add in there. But that's great that we're moving pretty fast and implementing new things pretty rapidly. So let's take a look at another question that we have here. Let's see here. Can the application be resubmitted? So can we create a button or can the button be renamed resubmit? So Amar, can you help us out with that one?
Yeah, sure. The application can certainly be resubmitted, and buttons can also be renamed to resubmit. So yes, a couple things here. If you've got a sendback state that's been set up on your application workflow, you can add buttons that allow your grantee or maybe whoever's interacting with it to actually resubmit that application through the workflow itself. And with that particular button, you can actually name that button whatever you'd like. Most of the time, and probably good practice, is to rename it as resubmit. So it's a bit easier, clearer to understand. But again, that button can be relabeled to whatever you'd like it to be.
Yeah, no, that's great. And consistency, some people like to have the same button labels, but it may be nice to help clarify and label it resubmit, so it's a kind of visual reminder of like, all right, I should do it right the first time or this time I got to get it right because I had to resubmit it, right? So great question, thank you very much. Let's see what else we have in here. We have one from, hey Audra, we have one here, great question. Is there a way to temporarily skip someone or pass it to subsequent approval person, and once they approve, it can go back to the skip person? So an example would be if the program officer is on vacation, but to keep the workflow going, can I send it to the finance officer for their approval until the program person is back? So Amar, do you mind helping us kind of address that one?
Yeah, sure. So, and I think Carly might have a little bit more insight to this as well. So Carly, feel free to jump in here. But if there's a way for approvals on the actual application itself for multiple folks, and if let's say somebody is maybe out of pocket and other folks need to do that, that can certainly be done as well. I believe that's going to be done through the reviewer portal. You can assign multiple reviewers there, and that can be done as well. Carly, if it's all right, maybe if you want to shed some more light on that.
Sure, yeah. It reminds me a little bit of one of the pre-submitted questions we had, kind of like if somebody was out, could there be a proxy for them? But this sounds like we'd skip over the person who's out and we go to the next approver in the linear workflow. So yeah, in your question, Audra, I said and you as the admin, you can always do that, right? You don't even have to click on the workflow button. Actually, you can just click edit and change the workflow status to the workflow state that you want it to be. And that might be the way that I would do it, and leave a note saying that you did that. And then if the other person comes back and you want it to go back in time, you can just rearrange it that way. Again, that's kind of a one-off situation, right? Because it's not happening on a regular basis, I wouldn't build in a very structured workflow for that, right? With a skip button or a back and forth button. If it's happening on a regular basis, the scenario, then you would think maybe about how to structure your workflow to accommodate for it. But if it's one-off, an admin can always change the workflow status on behalf of whoever's out of the office.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, if it's a consistent thing, and you're welcome, Audra. If that's a consistent thing, it's great to build it into the workflow. But these one-offs, maybe the admin going in and manually editing the status so it hits the right person may be a better solution for that interim. All right. So let's see here. We have a question. Is there a way to change the system name? So Amar, can you help us out with that one?
Yeah, sure thing. So the system name is essentially a name assigned by Flux, right by the system. So unfortunately, that's a name that cannot be changed. That's something that will stay static within Flux itself. But when you add additional workflow states, or let's say you add additional buttons, rather, to my previous point, you can certainly change those names, and you can certainly change the labels as well. But unfortunately, the system name itself is already preset by Flux.
I just want to jump in on that too, Amar, just to clarify that we're talking about the workflow system name, right? Because we've been talking about some other system names today also. So you are correct that you can't change the workflow system name once you create it. So it's not necessarily that it's assigned by Flux, it's just that it's not editable. So when you create the workflow state, you're the one who is setting that system name. But if you need to change it in the future, you cannot change it in the future. If you really, really didn't want that system name, you could delete the workflow state and create a new one, but you want to be really careful that there are no records in that workflow state at the time of deletion. To add to that, there's a difference regarding system names of fields, like I was just referring to with the guard instructions. So for system names of fields, you can edit them, but you really don't want to if your system's live, because if you edit the system name, you will lose all the data that's been collected in that field, which is why we don't even allow you to edit the workflow system name. It's too risky. So the better way to do it, if you really feel strongly about what the system name is, if you have a typo, if you made it an error and you're not live yet, or you haven't started using it yet, you can just delete it and create a new one.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think I heard you mention, Carly, is the end user is the one that really starts with the system name for the workflow. So once you choose that system name, then that is what it is going forward. So choose wisely would be the best recommendation there. All right, so let's keep moving here. Let's see, we have one. As the form moves through different states, what determines the access and the visibility levels? So Amar, can you help expand upon the answer for that?
Yeah, sure thing, Sean. So one of the things that determines access and visibility is really through the use of roles and profiles, and specifically the roles itself. So when it comes to your particular workflow states, and as you're moving from point A to point B, and particular to the buttons itself, you can assign different particular roles and profiles against those buttons to allow specific user types to actually access those actions. Now you can do the same thing on workflow states. However, that's a bit more of an advanced configuration there that can be set, and typically something we don't exactly recommend, because you may not want to lock an entire workflow state itself to a particular role or a particular profile type. itself. That may actually cause some detriment itself when you go through your actual application workflow. So if you do want to utilize those steps in terms of visibility, we do recommend to do that within the buttons itself.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, and some great questions submitted so far. Really appreciate everybody's inquiries. Just as a reminder, anybody that hasn't had a chance to answer or ask a question yet, you can do so using the Q&A section or the chat function of the webinar. So let's take a look and see what else we have here. All right. All right, we have one here. What conditions do clients use? So like additional legal review for political sensitive activities, streamline process for sponsorships. Is kind of, Carly, can you help us expand upon the type of conditions that clients use?
Sure. I think this is referring to guard instructions again, if I'm interpreting the question correctly. So like I was saying before, you really can type out any sort of code in the guard instruction to create a condition, meaning only show this button if the additional legal review for political sensitive activity has been checked off, right? And so therefore we're creating more complex workflows that are dependent on a data point that's already been collected in the system. And really in terms of what types of conditions do clients use, it could be literally any data point in the system. So use case, I think that's a good example, Sean, if it's been checked off that it's highly sensitive and therefore it needs to go to a third level of approval from a legal counsel, you could put that condition onto the guard instruction and therefore it will always move forward one more. And if it wasn't checked off that it had political sensitivity, then it would just go two levels of approval. Another example would be the amount that is being recommended for the grant. If it's over $200,000, it always needs to go to the president for approval, but if it's under $200,000, it's fine to just go to the programmatic director, for example. So as long as a data point has been collected prior to that workflow state, you can use that data point to initiate a condition via the guard instructions.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Carly. And that's a great point. We see a lot of the amount conditions in there, and that's a great one to put into play. So thank you very much. So I think that looks like that is all the questions that we've had submitted so far today. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there, and we're hitting about the time anyway, so it's great timing from everybody. But thank you all for being here today and the great questions we've had. We'll continue to post more content and schedule more webinars, so keep an eye on the training calendar for more sessions like this. And if there's anything that we didn't get to, or if you think of any other questions after the session, you can always let us know by posting in the community, and we're here to help. And tomorrow, just as a reminder, we have another Ask a Fluxxpert Q&A around dashboards and portals. So if you haven't already, take a look at our training calendar within our community and or the knowledge base, and there's links for the Ask a Fluxxer as well as the upcoming training webinars. So I want to thank everybody again for joining us today, and I hope that you guys have a very great and productive week. Carly and Amar, thank you so much for joining us. Really was a pleasure.
Thanks, Sean. Take care.
All right,
Thanks,
you
Sean.
too.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.